Hey everybody, welcome back. So in this video I wanted to talk about misophonia and hyperacusis. You may or may not be familiar with those terms, but I did have another video a little while back where I discussed hypersensitivity. Misophonia and hyperacusis kind of follow more into the hearing hypersensitivity. There's different types of hypersensitivity with different senses, but this one's kind of more primarily focused on auditory kind of things. Misophonia and hyperacusis, in regards to hypersensitivity, are a little bit different because they're kind of a little bit more into a subcategory. If we start with misophonia, a lot of people have probably had some pretty similar symptoms with that in their lives. But with misophonia, the people who experience it, they tend to feel a lot of discomfort with everyday noises like chewing, yawning, and really kind of repetitive noises that most people probably wouldn't really focus on too much. Not a lot is very well understood about this disorder, but it is believed to be actually fairly common. But the difference with misophonia is that it's not really focused on as much with volume as it is just certain noises that people just find extremely irritating. And the person's reactions to these noises is also kind of the bigger difference, because, like I stated before, in a typical person, something like yawning, sneezing, all that stuff is kind of like, it's annoying, but you just kind of deal with it. But with somebody with misophonia, these noises are actually almost kind of painful to these people. Like, they're just, it's like, if you've ever heard the phrase, when a noise drives you crazy, misophonia is kind of more where this kind of falls into. Like, these can be noises that just really make people very angry, very irritable, and they just feel like they have to get away from whatever noise this is because it's just so irritating. And again, it's not very well understood. There have been debates as to whether or not it's a mental illness all its own, or if it's a symptom of other mental illnesses, or if it's something kind of like with hyperacusis, because misophonia and hyperacusis are actually two separate conditions, but in some cases they can overlap. With hyperacusis, noises in general are very amplified to the individual, usually as a result of trauma to the ear or something that affects the hearing. Like if somebody is, if they've had trauma to their actual ear, if they've had a concussion, they, in some cases, can develop hyperacusis as a result. There are also some people that have developed this condition, they don't even know what the cause of it was. Maybe they've had chronic ear infections as a child or just in general. So with that one, it's normal everyday sounds are actually more amplified versus misophonia, where it's kind of normal everyday sounds that just, for lack of a better term, they drive you nuts. So you can see how these two conditions can actually get confused rather easily if you don't know the difference, or if you're somebody who has maybe symptoms of both of them and you're not sure which one it is. How diagnosis can be so irritating. And then, of course, if you add to things like hypersensitivity, well, certain diseases like, autism spectrum disorder or ASD, very prone to hypersensitivity, and not just with hearing, but with other senses, like lights are very bright, certain tastes, certain textures are very difficult for people to kind of process compared to others. And just like with anything, these diseases, these kind of conditions can all exist on a spectrum. Sometimes these things can resolve on their own and sometimes they don't. So as you can see, if you really kind of have hearing sensitivity, certain noises driving you crazy, you're probably going to be more focused on getting away from the noise that's absolutely positively freaking bugging you than, hey, is it a hyperacusis? Is it misophonia? Is it hypersensitivity? You're probably not going to be worried about the labels. You're just going to really just want to try to figure out what this is and how do I deal with it. When people have loud noises, especially that bother them, it's not uncommon for them, like especially if it's somebody who deals with it on a more chronic basis, like even I myself have found certain like kind of types of hearing protection, like earplugs or headphones. They've been rather helpful, but people tend to kind of overuse them, if that makes sense. Because the thing is, if you use something like headphones all the time to kind of muffle sounds, like it can work very well in very like loud environments because you want to protect your hearing from further damage. In any of these diseases, if you have any kind of hearing damage already, you really don't want it to get worse. But if you rely too much on headphones, believe it or not, it can actually make the problem worse, which that sounds weird, but the more you use it, you start to rely on those a lot more. So then, okay, you don't have the headphones, maybe you forgot to bring your headphones with you. Now these sounds are even louder because you're so used to wearing these headphones all the time to kind of shield you from the noise. So although it can be helpful in various situations where you can't get away from the noise and it's something really loud like a concert, you just don't want to use them more than you can. Usually common treatments for these kind of diseases, especially if it's something like misophonia or maybe certain levels of hypersensitivity, one of the things they kind of do is they can kind of almost have to desensitize you to the noise. Like, you can deal with some noises, but then they get to a certain frequency and it's painful, unbearable. Usually what they'll try to do is kind of just gradually work their way up in terms of desensitizing you to the noise. Like, if we use a 0 to 10 scale, and let's say 10 is extremely, like, intense noise, and 0 is, like, just dead quiet, like nothing. Let's say they start you out at, like, a 1 or a 2, and you're just fine with that, and then slowly it's, like, turning up a dial. Okay, now we're gonna work up to 3, 4, 5, just kind of gradually work your way up. And maybe once you get to 6, that's too much for you. If they do this over a slow period of time and just kind of gently kind of expose you to certain levels of noise just gradually, you can kind of get used to these levels of noise kind of at your own pace and kind of learning to kind of tolerate these in small steps, because you don't want to overload yourself when you're trying to kind of rebuild your tolerance to this kind of stuff. And this can be something that can take quite a while. But that is certain types of therapy that people have looked into. Sometimes you can see an audiologist for hearing-related issues. And that can be, even if you're somebody who's hard of hearing, there can be things that, if you see certain professionals, that they can do as well. But living with these kind of diseases, I feel like, is kind of something that people don't really think about. But it can be very frustrating to constantly feel like that the world is just too loud for you. And, like, no matter what you do, every little noise is just getting on your nerves, and you feel like you don't want to go to certain places like concerts with your friends or even out to eat because people are too loud. Sometimes even going to a grocery store and going shopping. Again, you don't really think much of it, but for some people it can actually be very unpleasant, and there are some people that are much more sensitive to those noise than other people. And sometimes it can vary based on the day too. You can have certain days where your symptoms can seem better, and maybe going to like the grocery store isn't so bad. But then there can be others days where you feel like your hearing is really cranked up, and especially if you go to a store where it's a busier day and there's like more kids screaming and just people just doing certain things that are louder. Sometimes you see people doing things with deliveries that make noise. It can be a very intense thing to do that people don't always think about if they don't have hearing-based issues. So that's kind of my scoop on misophonia and hyperacusis, and hopefully this is insightful for people who battle these kind of symptoms on a regular basis. So until then, have a great day, guys.